My name is Amara. I'm 42 years old, and the call that changed my life came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. My stepdad laughed as he said, "I sold your mountain cabin to pay my gambling debts." That cabin was never his. And in that moment, I realized betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Comes from family. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more real family drama and emotional courage stories. The phone rang while I was folding laundry, the steady hum of the dryer filling the small house I'd lived in alone for years. I remember wiping my hands on a towel before answering, already tired, already bracing myself. When I saw my stepdad's name on the screen, my stomach tightened. We didn't talk often. When we did, it was usually brief and uncomfortable. Still, I answered. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. His response came too fast, too cheerful. "Hey, Amara," he said, like this was just another casual check-in. Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an awkward one. A full careless laugh. That's when he said it. "I sold your mountain cabin to settle my gambling debts." For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. I stood still, the towel slipping from my hands, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I asked him to repeat himself, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound calm. He didn't hesitate. He repeated it, slower this time, like he was explaining something obvious. "It was just sitting there," he said. "I needed the money. It worked out." Then he laughed again, softer this time, like he expected me to join him. I didn't. I couldn't. The cabin wasn't just a building tucked into the mountains. It was the last thing my mother left me that still felt whole. I leaned against the counter to steady myself, my legs suddenly weak. My mind raced back to summers spent there, to mornings wrapped in silence, to my mother's voice calling my name from the porch. All of it felt like it was being ripped away in one careless sentence. I told him he had no right. The words came out sharper than I expected. He brushed them aside easily. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "Your name was never fully on the paperwork. Besides, family helps family." That sentence hurt more than the rest. Family helps family. He said it like a rule, like something I was breaking by even questioning him. I reminded him that my mother wanted me to have that place. He sighed, annoyed now. "Your mother's gone, Amara," he said. "You need to move on." His tone was cold, final, like he'd already decided this conversation was over. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly but deep and slow. As he talked, I noticed how calm he sounded, how prepared. This wasn't a mistake or a rushed decision. He had planned this. He had convinced himself it was reasonable. I asked him when it happened. He gave me a date, recent enough that the shock still felt fresh, but long enough that he assumed I couldn't undo it. I asked who bought it. He refused to say. "It's done," he told me. "No point digging around." That was when I realized he thought I was powerless. That because I was older, because I lived quietly, because I avoided conflict, I would simply accept this. The realization burned more than anger. Felt like being erased. I tried to keep the conversation going, hoping for an explanation that made sense, but he grew impatient. He said he had a lot going on and didn't have time for my emotions. That stung. My emotions. As if grief and betrayal were inconveniences he could brush aside. He ended the call quickly, saying he'd talk to me later. When the line went dead, the silence in my kitchen felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. I stared at my phone, half expecting it to ring again, half hoping it wouldn't. It didn't. I sank into a chair and sat there longer than I can measure. My hands trembled. My thoughts felt tangled. I wasn't just angry. I felt foolish. Foolish for trusting him after my mother died. Foolish for not checking the paperwork sooner. Foolish for believing that shared history meant shared respect. The cabin had always been my escape. When life felt too loud, too demanding, I went there. I walked the narrow trail behind it. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to the wind. Now, with one phone call, that refuge felt stolen. I stood up and paced the kitchen, replaying every word he said. The laugh echoed in my head. That laugh told me everything. He didn't regret it. He didn't feel bad. He felt relieved. The idea that my loss solved his problem made my chest tighten. I wondered how long his gambling had been going on, how much he'd hidden. I wondered if my mother had known. That thought hurt the most. I wished I could call her, hear her voice, ask her what to do. Instead, I was alone with the truth. I went to the window and looked out at my small backyard, trying to ground myself. The world looked the same as it had an hour earlier, but I felt different. Something had shifted. I realized this wasn't just about property. It was about being dismissed, laughed at, treated like I didn't matter. I had spent years keeping the peace, biting my tongue, letting small slights pass. This was not small. This was a line crossed. My heart ached, but beneath that ache, something firmer began to form. Resolve. I picked up my phone again, not to call him back, but to check the time. The day was still moving forward, whether I was ready or not. I knew I couldn't fix everything in that moment. I knew I needed to breathe, to think, to steady myself. But I also knew one thing clearly. This call had changed everything. The relationship I thought I had with my stepdad was gone. In its place was a hard truth I could no longer ignore. He had laughed when he took something precious from me. And I wasn't going to forget that sound. I stayed seated long after the call ended. The phone resting face down on the table like it had done something wrong. My chest felt tight, not sharp with panic, but heavy like something old had been placed back on my heart. I didn't cry yet. Instead, my mind drifted, pulled toward the cabin without asking my permission. It always did that. When life felt unsteady, my thoughts went there first, as if the place itself was a living thing that knew me. That cabin wasn't fancy. It sat halfway up a quiet mountain road, surrounded by tall pines and uneven ground. The paint had chipped years ago, and one of the porch boards creaked no matter how many times I nailed it back down. But it was the first place that ever felt like it belonged to me. My mother bought it when I was in my 30s, after years of working extra hours and skipping vacations. She used to say it was her reward for surviving life. When she handed me the keys one autumn afternoon, she said, "This is where you go when the world gets too loud." I remembered that first night there alone. I was nervous, listening to unfamiliar sounds, convinced every rustle meant trouble. But then morning came. Sunlight slipped through thin curtains. The air smelled clean, sharp, and honest. I brewed coffee on the old stove and sat on the porch wrapped in a sweater. I felt small in the best way. I felt held. Over the years, I returned whenever I needed quiet. After hard days. After disappointments. After my mother passed, most of all. After she died, the cabin became my anchor. Grief made everything feel slippery, like I couldn't get my footing. At the cabin, time slowed. I talked to her out loud while sweeping the porch. I cooked her favorite meals even though I ate alone. I kept her old quilt folded on the couch, the one she insisted was too ugly to throw away. Every object there carried her touch. Losing the cabin felt like losing her again, only this time it came with laughter. My stepdad never understood any of that. He visited once, complained the whole time, and said it felt isolated. He asked why anyone would choose quiet over convenience. I didn't argue. I learned early that explaining feelings to someone like him was like speaking into the wind. When my mother was alive, she softened his edges. Without her, he grew sharper. He treated the cabin like an unused asset, something idle and wasted. To him, value only existed in numbers. I stood up and walked through my house, touching familiar things, trying to calm myself. Every room felt suddenly temporary. The cabin had always been my constant. Knowing it might no longer be mine made everything else feel less secure. I opened a drawer and found an old set of photos I'd taken there over the years. Trees in different seasons. Snow piled against the door. A crooked snowman I built one winter just to laugh at myself. Each photo reminded me that the cabin wasn't just a place. It was proof that I had lived fully, quietly, honestly. I thought about the small rituals I kept there. Lighting the same lamp every evening. Leaving a bowl of birdseed on the railing. Writing letters I never sent, then burning them in the fireplace. Those moments weren't dramatic. They were ordinary. But they were mine. My stepdad's voice echoed in my head again, dismissive and light, as if those memories were clutter he had finally cleared away. What hurt most was knowing he never asked. Not once. If he had called and said he was struggling, that he needed help, I would have listened. I might have said no, but I would have listened. Instead, he decided for me. He assumed I wouldn't matter. That assumption cut deep. It told me exactly where I stood in his world. Useful when silent. Disposable when inconvenient. I sat back down and closed my eyes. I imagined driving up the mountain road, the way it curved sharply near the top. I imagined the sound of gravel under tires. I imagined unlocking the door and stepping inside. The image felt fragile, like it might vanish if I held it too tightly. My breathing slowed as I focused on those details. I wasn't ready to let them go. There were moments at the cabin that changed me. Once during a storm, the power went out for 2 days. I read by lantern light and listened to rain drum against the roof. I learned I could sit with silence without being afraid. Another time, I invited a friend who was grieving her own loss. We didn't talk much. We just sat side by side watching the fog lift. She told me later it was the first time she'd felt calm in months. That place held space for people. It held space for healing. The idea that someone else might walk through those rooms without knowing their meaning made my chest ache. Not because they didn't deserve peace, but because the peace had been taken from me without warning. I wasn't angry yet. I was mourning. Mourning the possibility of goodbye. Mourning the trust one thought existed. Mourning the version of my stepdad I hoped he could be. As the afternoon light shifted, I realized something quietly important. The cabin had taught me patience. It had taught me to observe before reacting. That lesson surfaced now, steady and firm. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I could undo what had been done. But I knew this. What the cabin gave me couldn't be erased by a single decision. Its meaning lived in me. I picked up the photos again and placed them carefully back in the drawer. My hands felt steadier. The hurt was still there, but it no longer owned me. The cabin was more than wood and land. It was resilience shaped into a place. And as I sat alone in my quiet house, I understood that whatever came next, I would carry that strength forward, just like my mother hoped I would. As the quiet settled around me, I stayed seated, letting the weight of my thoughts slow my breathing. The strength I felt didn't come from certainty. It came from the simple decision to stop guessing and start finding answers. I stood, grabbed my purse, and wrote a short list on a scrap of paper. Names. Offices. Questions. Nothing dramatic. Just the next right steps. If the cabin taught me anything, it was that clarity comes from patience, not panic. The next morning, I drove into town earlier than usual. The sky was pale, the roads nearly empty. I stopped at a small diner for coffee, more out of habit than hunger. The waitress recognized me and asked how I was doing. I smiled and said, "One step at a time." It felt honest. I needed to stay grounded. Big emotions would come later. Right now I needed facts. My first stop was the county records office. The building was plain brick and slightly worn like most government buildings. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and dust. I took a number and sat on a hard chair, listening to quiet conversations and the hum of an old ceiling fan. When my number was called, I approached the counter and explained carefully that I was trying to understand a recent property sale involving my family. The clerk was a woman about my age with kind eyes and a careful way of speaking. She asked for the address. I gave it to her, my voice steady. She typed slowly, reading the screen as she went. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "That's interesting," she said. My heart skipped. I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then said, "There's a transfer recorded, but some documents are missing. It's not unusual, but it does raise questions." She looked at me over her glasses. "Are you the daughter?" I nodded. She didn't say much after that, but she printed copies and slid them across the counter. "Take these," she said softly. "You might want to look closely." That was the first crack in the story my stepdad told me. Not proof, but possibility. I thanked her and stepped outside, the sun brighter than before, my mind racing. I sat in my car and reviewed the papers. Dates. Names. Signatures. One line stood out. My name was typed, but the signature didn't look like mine. It was close enough to pass at a glance, but wrong in a way only I would notice. My stomach turned. I wasn't ready to name it yet, but the truth was leaning toward me, waiting. Later that afternoon, I called the real estate office listed on the documents. The agent sounded surprised when I introduced myself. "I didn't realize there was another owner involved," she said carefully. That sentence landed heavy. I asked who contacted her originally. She confirmed it was my stepdad. She said he was confident, prepared, and eager to close quickly. "He said it was a family matter," she added. "We're told not to ask too many personal questions." I thanked her and hung up. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a picture I didn't like but couldn't ignore. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion. It was intentional. I sat quietly, letting that settle. I wasn't shocked anymore. I was focused. Over the next few days I made more calls. The bank. The title company. Each conversation added another detail. The sale moved fast. Too fast. The buyer paid cash. The funds went directly to an account I didn't recognize. When I asked whose name was on it, there was a pause on the line. Your stepfather's, the banker said. And another entity. I asked what kind. He said he couldn't share more without formal requests. That night I barely slept. My mind replayed conversations not with fear but with attention. I realized how often my stepdad avoided specifics. How often he spoke in general terms. He counted on people not digging deeper. That habit had served him until now. A few days later, I ran into an old neighbor from the mountain area at the grocery store. She asked if I'd sold the cabin. I felt my face warm. I said I hadn't. She looked confused. I saw strangers up there, she said. They asked about utilities. That confirmed what paperwork already suggested. The sale was real. The consequences were already moving. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table, spreading out everything I'd gathered. Papers. Notes. Names. For the first time the situation felt solid, not overwhelming. I could see where things didn't line up. Where shortcuts were taken. Where truth bent. And in those bends I saw opportunity. One evening my stepdad called again. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was tense this time. People are asking questions, he said. I didn't respond right away. Silence has weight if you let it. He continued, filling the space. You didn't go to the county office, did you? That question told me everything. I said calmly. I'm just learning what's mine. He scoffed, but the laugh was gone. After the call I sat back and exhaled. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was documented, spoken aloud, confirmed by strangers who had no reason to lie. The cabin was never his to sell. And now the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. As I gathered the papers into a folder, I felt a steady resolve settle in. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about accuracy. About restoring balance. The cabin had taught me to listen before acting, to observe the ground before stepping forward. Now, armed with truth instead of assumption, I was ready to move carefully, deliberately, and without apology. I slid the folder closed and rested my hands on top of it, feeling the firmness of paper beneath my palms. Everything I had learned sat there, quiet but solid. I didn't feel rushed anymore. For the first time since the call, I felt steady. I knew yelling wouldn't help. Pleading wouldn't either. What would help was letting people whose job it was to untangle things do exactly that. The next morning, I made an appointment with a local legal aid office. It wasn't some fancy downtown building, just a small suite tucked above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread drifted up the stairs as I waited. It reminded me of early mornings at the cabin, when I used to bake biscuits because the oven warmed the whole place. That memory calmed me as I was called inside. The woman I met with spoke gently and didn't interrupt. She let me talk at my own pace. I laid out the documents, explained the timeline, and answered her questions honestly. She nodded more than she spoke, which told me she was listening carefully. When she finally leaned back, she said, "You did the right thing by coming here first." Those words mattered more than I expected. She explained what steps could be taken without rushing me or talking down to me. She didn't promise quick results. She didn't dramatize the situation. She simply laid out the process. Paperwork. Notices. Requests for clarification. This isn't about emotion, she said. It's about accuracy. I liked that. Accuracy felt clean. Fair. I left with a checklist and a timeline. Nothing dramatic. Just structure. At home I made copies, labeled envelopes, and placed everything neatly in order. Each small task gave me a sense of control. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was acting. A few days later, I received a call from the title company. Their tone had changed since our last conversation. They asked for written confirmation of my ownership interest. I sent it. Then they asked for identification. I sent that too. The back and forth felt slow but purposeful. Every message built on the last, tightening the net around the truth. During that time my stepdad reached out again. His voice was cautious now. "We don't need to make this complicated," he said. I replied calmly, "I'm not making it complicated. I'm letting it be clear." He paused, then changed the subject. That told me enough. He knew the ground was shifting. I noticed changes in myself as the days passed. I slept better. I spoke more confidently. I stopped rehearsing arguments in my head. I didn't need them. The system didn't require raised voices. It required documentation, patience, and consistency. All things I could provide. One afternoon, I was asked to attend a brief meeting with a county official. It wasn't intimidating, just formal. A desk, 2 chairs, a stack of forms. The official explained that discrepancies had been flagged. Signatures were under review. The transfer timeline didn't align with best practices. Each statement felt like a weightlifting. Not because it guaranteed anything, but because it confirmed I wasn't imagining things. I thanked him and stepped outside into the afternoon sun. I sat in my car and allowed myself a long breath. For the first time I felt seen. Not as someone emotional or difficult, but as someone rightfully asking questions. As the process continued, I heard from the buyer's representative. They wanted clarification before proceeding further. Their tone was polite but firm. I didn't speak badly about my stepdad. I didn't need to. I stuck to facts. Ownership history. Intent. Documentation. Silence filled the gaps where excuses once lived. Friends began to notice the change in me. One asked how I was holding up. I told her I was tired but clear. She smiled and said clarity looked good on me. I carried that with me. Weeks passed. Letters arrived. Emails followed. Each one felt like a step forward even when the language was slow and careful. I learned to read between the lines. Requests meant doubt. Doubt meant progress. One evening, as I organized another stack of papers, I realized something important. I wasn't driven by revenge. I was driven by respect. Respect for my mother's wishes. Respect for myself. Respect for the truth. That realization softened something inside me. The system didn't move fast, but it moved steadily. And in that steadiness I found peace. I didn't need to confront my stepdad face to face. I didn't need apologies or explanations. The process was already speaking louder than words ever could. As I placed the folder back on the shelf, I felt a quiet confidence settle in. Whatever the outcome, I had chosen the path that aligned with who I was. Calm, patient, unwilling to be erased. And as the system continued its work, I finally allowed myself to believe that the truth, once set in motion, knows exactly where to go. The day I finally received confirmation that the sale was being reversed, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light soft on the walls, the folder of documents finally complete. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was proof that I had acted with patience, clarity, and determination. I didn't feel triumphant in a loud, dramatic way. Instead, a quiet satisfaction settled in my chest, steady and warming, the kind that comes from knowing you've protected what's yours while remaining true to yourself. I immediately thought of the cabin. The familiar structure, nestled halfway up the mountain road, had been in my mind constantly these past weeks. I could almost see the crooked porch boards, the pine scent in the air, and the morning sun spilling through the small living room window. I could hear the soft crackle of the fireplace I kept burning on cold evenings, and the distant call of the ravens that liked to sit on the ridge. Driving there felt like reclaiming not just property, but memories, stability, and trust one had nearly lost. The drive itself felt strange, almost ceremonial. I rolled the windows down and let the crisp mountain air fill the car, as though inhaling clarity itself. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I approached the familiar turnoff, and for the first time since the sale, I felt like I belonged somewhere entirely. The cabin had always been a haven, but now it represented more. Autonomy, respect, and finally justice in its quietest form. I parked at the bottom of the driveway and paused, looking up the path that led to my sanctuary. The trees swayed gently in the wind, almost like a welcome. Stepping onto the porch, I paused again. The air smelled of pine and earth, exactly as it had in the summers of my youth. I ran my hand along the railing, worn smooth over time, feeling the texture beneath my fingers. This small, ordinary action anchored me. The cabin had survived neglect, weather, and, temporarily, betrayal. And now I was back, the rightful caretaker, grounded in the fact that I had fought carefully but firmly for it. Nothing dramatic had been necessary. Just persistence, clear thinking, and patience. Inside, I walked slowly, observing the spaces I knew so intimately. The furniture bore the quiet marks of daily life, slight scratches on the table, the sun-faded patch on the couch where my mother had sat. The kitchen smelled faintly of wood and the lingering memory of old meals. I opened the windows, letting sunlight and fresh air push out the heaviness of the past weeks. Each room felt alive again, reclaiming its rhythm as though my presence had restored its balance. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I ran my fingers across the worn surface, thinking about how ordinary objects hold extraordinary significance. The cabin wasn't just a place. It was a teacher, reminding me of my mother's resilience, my own patience, and the importance of boundaries. I spent hours that day walking through each room, touching familiar surfaces, remembering every quiet ritual I had kept. The small lamp in the corner, the stack of letters I never sent, the quilt folded neatly on the couch. Each object told a story. Each memory reinforced that taking back the cabin wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about reclaiming myself. That evening, I decided to invite a few close friends who had supported me during this ordeal. I wanted them to see the cabin as I saw it, not as a commodity, but as a space of comfort and restoration. Watching their reactions, I realized the cabin had always offered more than shelter. It was a place where time slowed, where laughter and sorrow coexisted quietly, where lessons were absorbed simply by being present. My stepdad had underestimated its value in ways that couldn't be measured in dollars. As we sat around the fireplace talking quietly and sipping warm tea, I felt a profound sense of completeness. The cabin had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. And I had weathered this battle with integrity and tact. We spoke about everything but the sale. There was no need to rehash betrayal when the present was this alive. I realized that taking back the cabin wasn't about punishing someone. It was about honoring what mattered. I could feel the weight of tension leaving my shoulders. Later that night I went outside, the moon illuminating the mountain tops, silver light washing over the pine needles. I stood silently, breathing deeply, and thought about my stepdad. I felt no need to confront him. I didn't need to shout or accuse. His actions were evident to anyone who cared to look. My focus was on what I had reclaimed and the strength that came with it. I understood then that true power often manifests quietly, through preparation, resilience, and the refusal to be erased. The next morning, I walked the trail behind the cabin, as I had done countless times before. Each step brought clarity. I considered the weeks of research, calls, and meetings that had led me here. There had been tension, yes, but also moments of reflection and growth. I had discovered patience I didn't know I possessed, the ability to navigate bureaucracy, and a steadiness in decision-making that extended beyond property disputes. The cabin had become more than a structure. It had become a testament to my own endurance. During my walks, I noticed small details I had missed before. The subtle curve of the creek as it flowed past the property, the texture of moss on rocks, the way light shifted through the trees at different times of day. It felt like the cabin was breathing around me, welcoming me back not just as a visitor, but as its rightful steward. These details reminded me that life's value often resides in quiet observation, in noticing things that others might overlook. The simplicity of these moments reinforced my sense of purpose. I also began making practical plans. I repaired the porch boards more carefully than before, painted over areas that had been chipped for too long, and organized spaces that had fallen into minor disarray. Each act of maintenance felt symbolic, a statement of care and ownership. Every nail hammered, every brushstroke applied, was an assertion that this space was mine again. And not merely because of legal decisions, but because of the respect and attention I invested in it. By mid-afternoon, a neighbor from down the road stopped by. He had been unaware of the confusion surrounding the sale. I explained simply that the cabin was back under my care, and that the legal process had confirmed its rightful ownership. He nodded, a quiet smile acknowledging the struggles that had taken place. There was no need for drama. The acknowledgement itself felt validating. The cabin's return wasn't a public spectacle. It was a restoration of what had been disrupted quietly and respectfully. Later, I sat on the porch as the sun began to set, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, The air smelled faintly of pine and the smoke from the fireplace I kept burning. I reflected on the weeks of tension, the challenges of dealing with bureaucracy, and the emotional toll of betrayal. Yet here I was standing stronger, having taken back not just a cabin, but a sense of self-respect, confidence, and clarity. The space allowed me to process grief without being consumed by it. As the evening deepened, I lit lanterns along the walkway and in the cabin's interior. The soft glow of light against wooden walls created a sense of warmth and security I hadn't realized I was missing. I felt gratitude for the small, ordinary rituals that had anchored me. Brewing coffee on the old stove, listening to the wind through the pines, and simply being present. These moments reinforced the cabin's significance, not as a property to be sold, but as a sanctuary of life lived fully, thoughtfully, and intentionally. A week later, I received word that the buyer's questions had been resolved, and the transaction was officially nullified. The cabin was, in every sense, back where it belonged. My stepdad's calls ceased shortly thereafter. I didn't feel a need to reach out or gloat. Silence in this case was its own statement. What mattered wasn't revenge. It was the restoration of balance, of truth, and of my own confidence in the world around me. The following weekend, I invited friends and family for a quiet gathering at the cabin. We sat around the fireplace, shared meals, and laughed softly at memories that had nothing to do with conflict. The cabin now carried not only my history but our shared experiences. Each conversation, each smile, each quiet moment was a reinforcement of the value this space held. It wasn't just my cabin anymore. It was a vessel for connection, reflection, and grounded living. As night fell, I took one final walk around the perimeter of the property. The stars were sharp and bright, clear against the mountain sky. I felt an almost physical sense of closure. The cabin had been more than wood and nails. It had been a lifeline, a teacher, and now, a monument to patience and perseverance. I had reclaimed what was mine, yes, but I had also reclaimed my sense of agency, dignity, and peace. Sitting on the porch one last time before heading inside for the night, I breathed deeply, taking in the scent of pine, the subtle chill of evening air, and the soft rustle of leaves. The cabin stood firm, silent, yet alive, a testament to continuity and care. I understood that what I had taken back extended far beyond walls and windows. I had reclaimed trust in myself, the ability to act deliberately, and the confidence that fairness and persistence could outlast deceit. In the quiet of that night, I made a promise to myself. No longer would I allow my sense of security or peace to be dismissed. I would protect what mattered, not out of anger but out of respect, for myself, for my mother's memory, and for the lessons learned along the way. The cabin had returned, but so had a deeper understanding of my own strength, patience, and the power of letting truth speak.